My name is Camille. 10 minutes after my divorce hearing ended, I walked away with nothing but my 7-year-old son. Meanwhile, my ex-husband, his pregnant mistress, and his arrogant family gathered to celebrate his new life. They thought they had left me entirely destitute. They had no idea that I was the one who had just locked the cage, and I was simply waiting for the federal government to swallow them whole. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family who underestimated your worth and tried to break you. The heavy oak gavel struck the sounding block with a sharp crack that echoed through the Fulton County courtroom. With that single sound, 11 years of marriage sacrifice and financial manipulation were legally dissolved. I sat perfectly still at the plaintiff table, refusing to show a single ounce of emotion. Across the aisle, Darius leaned back in his custom-tailored Italian suit, a smug, victorious grin spreading across his handsome face. He wrapped his arm tightly around Jasmine, his 24-year-old mistress, who intentionally thrust her pregnant belly forward for me to see. The judge had just finalized the asset division, reading the binding agreement into the official court record. It was a complete and total sweep for Darius, exactly as his high-priced lawyers had orchestrated, and exactly as I had secretly wanted. The judge declared that Darius was granted full undivided ownership of Sterling Real Estate Enterprises, the multi-million-dollar company I had spent years quietly managing from the shadows as a forensic auditor. He kept the sprawling 6-bedroom mansion in the prestigious Buckhead neighborhood. He kept the luxury vehicles, the investment portfolios, and the joint savings accounts. I did not object. I did not fight for a single share of the company or a single square foot of the property. I sat in silence and let him take absolute ownership of everything. The defense attorneys whispered to each other, clearly shocked by how easily I had surrendered. They thought I was a broken, intimidated woman who simply lacked the resources to fight a drawn-out legal battle. As the courtroom doors swung open, the real performance began. I picked up my modest leather tote bag, took the hand of my son Leo, and stepped out into the expansive marble hallway. We were immediately met by the rest of the Sterling family, who had been waiting outside the double doors like a pack of wolves ready to feast on a carcass. Darius strutted out behind me, and the hallway erupted into cheers. His mother Beatrice, wearing her Sunday-best church hat and a heavy pearl necklace, clapped her manicured hands together in sheer delight. His sister Tasha and brother-in-law Jamal were popping the cork on a bottle of sparkling cider right there in the courthouse corridor, laughing loudly enough for the passing court bailiffs to look over in annoyance. Jamal, a city councilman who relied heavily on Darius for campaign funding, patted Darius hard on the back, loudly congratulating him on dropping the dead weight. Darius broke away from his cheering section and walked over to where Leo and I were standing by the elevators. He reached into his designer jacket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and held it out to me. His eyes were cold, mocking, and full of the dark entitlement that had poisoned our entire marriage. He made sure to speak loudly enough so that the passing lawyers and court staff could hear his grand gesture of charity. "Take this, Camille," he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "It is a cashier's check for $5,000. Buy yourself a decent apartment in whatever ghetto you plan on moving back to. Buy the boy some new school clothes. I won a massive court victory today, keeping my entire fortune, but I am not a monster. I want to make sure you do not starve on the streets while you look for a secretarial job." Jasmine giggled from a few feet away, leaning her head on Beatrice's shoulder and rubbing her baby bump. I looked down at the check in his hand. $5,000. A pathetic crumb from a man whose entire empire was built on my late nights fixing his disastrous ledgers, hiding his terrible investments, and restructuring his illegal loans so the business would not collapse. He was publicly humiliating me, establishing his dominance in front of his family, proving to them that he had successfully discarded the starter wife without losing a dime of his wealth. I did not reach for the check immediately. I just looked at him, studying the blinding arrogance in his posture. He genuinely believed he was untouchable. Before I could say a word, Beatrice marched over her heels, clicking aggressively against the marble floor. She stood right next to Darius, crossing her arms and looking down her nose at me. The sweet, loving grandmother persona she wore to church every Sunday completely vanished, replaced by the vicious matriarch she truly was. "You should be on your knees thanking my son!" Beatrice spat, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You came into this family from a public housing project in Zone 6 with nothing but cheap shoes and a bad attitude. My son elevated you. We gave you the sterling name. We let you sit at our dinner table when you did not even know which fork to use. And now you are leaving exactly as you arrived, with absolutely nothing. You are a complete failure as a wife. Do not ever think about calling us when that $5,000 runs out." Her words hung in the air, heavy and venomous. For years I had swallowed that exact poison to keep the peace. I had smiled tightly through Thanksgiving dinners, while Beatrice made passive-aggressive comments about my working-class parents. I had stayed silent when Darius bought Tasha expensive designer bags using corporate funds that I knew were meant for the company payroll taxes. I had played the role of the quiet, grateful, submissive woman because I believed in protecting the family unit for the sake of my son. I had absorbed their insults, fixed their mistakes, and kept them all out of bankruptcy. But that compliant woman was dead. She had died the day I found Jasmine's ultrasound picture hidden in the side pocket of Darius's golf bag, along with a receipt for a luxury condo leased under the company's name. I calmly reached out and took the check from Darius's hand. Beatrice smirked, looking at Tasha, and nodding, assuming I was accepting my defeat like a good little peasant. Darius puffed out his chest, adjusting his silk tie, ready to turn around and rejoin his victory party. Instead of putting the check in my purse, I held it up between my fingers and tore it precisely down the middle. The hallway went dead silent. The laughter from Tasha and Jamal completely stopped. The sparkling cider stopped pouring. Darius dropped his smug smile, his brow furrowing in a mix of confusion and sudden anger. I tore the check again, and then a third time, letting the shredded pieces of paper flutter to the cold marble floor, landing directly on the toes of his expensive Italian loafers. "I do not want your money, Darius," I said, my voice steady, low, and completely devoid of emotion. "And Beatrice, you are absolutely right. I am leaving this marriage with exactly what I want. But before you celebrate too hard and drink too much of that cider, you might want to remember who filed your fake charity tax returns last year. You know, the youth foundation you used to illegally fund your country club memberships and your luxury vacations." Beatrice's face instantly lost all of its color. Her jaw clamped shut. She looked around nervously, suddenly intensely aware that we were standing in the middle of a federal courthouse surrounded by officers of the law. Darius stepped forward, his fists clenching tight at his sides. "What is wrong with you?" he hissed, his voice dropping to a harsh, threatening whisper. "You are crazy. You have nothing. You are walking out of here with zero assets and zero leverage." I smiled. A genuine, terrifying, ice-cold smile that I had held back for 6 agonizing months. "Enjoy the company, Darius. Every single share of it is yours now. All the debt, all the liabilities, and all the signatures. You got exactly what you asked for. Do not drop the ball now." I turned my back on them. I gripped Leo's hand gently, and we walked toward the heavy glass exit doors at the end of the corridor. Behind me, I could hear Jasmine nervously asking Darius what I meant by liabilities, and I could hear Beatrice snapping at Jamal to stop staring and get the cars. Their victory parade had suddenly hit a wall of deep, unsettling paranoia. They did not know the specifics yet, but they knew me. They knew I was a meticulous forensic auditor. They knew I never made a move without calculating the exact outcome. The hot Atlanta sun hit my face as I pushed through the doors and walked down the wide concrete steps. I did not look back. We walked 3 blocks away from the courthouse to the overflow parking lot where my beat-up Honda Civic was parked. It was a stark, embarrassing contrast to the brand-new Range Rover Darius had parked in the VIP section, but to me, the smell of the hot fabric seats inside my old car smelled like absolute freedom. I strapped Leo into his booster seat in the back, making sure he was comfortable, and handing him his favorite tablet. As I closed his door and walked around to the driver's side, my phone vibrated heavily in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was an encrypted text message from Special Agent Miller, the lead investigator for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division in Atlanta. We had been quietly working together in secret for the last 90 days, compiling mountains of hard evidence. The text read, "The ink is dry on the divorce settlement. You are officially legally removed from all corporate liability. Operation Greenlight is a go. Tactical units are moving in on the headquarters now." I leaned my head against the steering wheel and let out a long, shaky breath that I felt like I had been holding for a decade. The trap had snapped shut. By demanding 100% ownership of the real estate company in the divorce to ensure I got nothing, Darius had just legally absorbed all the fraudulent offshore debt, the forged bank loans, and the embezzled city funds. He had taken the bait perfectly. And now the federal government was on its way to collect their due. I started the engine of the Honda, turned the radio to a soft jazz station, and drove out of the parking lot. The destruction of the Sterling family empire had officially begun, and I had a front row seat to watch it all burn to the ground. 30 minutes later, the scene inside the private dining room of Chop's Lobster Bar in Buckhead was a picture of grotesque excess. The mahogany-paneled walls and dim ambient lighting usually hosted Atlanta's elite business tycoons, but tonight, it was the staging ground for the Sterling family's victory lap. Darius had rented out the most exclusive room in the restaurant, a space that commanded a $5,000 minimum just to walk through the heavy oak doors. He stood at the head of the long table, his suit jacket discarded over the back of a leather chair, effortlessly popping the cork on a bottle of Dom Perignon. The pale gold liquid spilled over the edges of the crystal flutes as he poured with reckless enthusiasm. Plates of chilled oysters, caviar, and truffle fries cluttered the center of the table, half-eaten and carelessly pushed aside. "Drink up, everyone," Darius announced, his voice booming with the unearned confidence of a man who believed he had just outsmarted the world. "Tonight, we celebrate the absolute and total preservation of the Sterling Empire. Not a single dime lost. Not a single property surrendered." Jasmine sat close to his right side, eagerly sipping sparkling water and running her hands over the smooth leather of her new Birkin bag, a gift Darius had bought her the moment the judge signed the papers. She giggled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I still cannot believe how easy it was, baby. She just sat there and let you take everything. The house, the company, the cars. She did not even try to put up a fight. I was so worried she would ask for half of the Buckhead house, and I really did not want to have to share my new garden with her." Beatrice scoffed from the opposite end of the table, cutting heavily into a massive, dry-aged ribeye steak. "What did you expect, Jasmine? I told you women like Camille do not have the stomach for real warfare. She comes from a family of factory workers and shift managers. Her idea of wealth is a savings account at a local credit union. When she saw the lineup of corporate lawyers Darius brought into that courtroom, she folded like a cheap lawn chair. She knew she was completely outclassed by our pedigree. Tasha, Darius's sister, held out her glass for a refill of champagne, her wrists heavy with diamond tennis bracelets that were conveniently expensed through the company's promotional budget. "Honestly, I am just relieved I do not have to pretend to like her anymore. Do you remember last Christmas when she tried to put a budget on the family gift exchange?" "A budget?" Tasha rolled her eyes, taking a large gulp of her drink. "I thought I was going to die of embarrassment when she suggested we cap gifts at $100. Good riddance to the dead weight. Now we can finally run this family the way it was meant to be run, without some paranoid accountant looking over our shoulders and questioning every single credit card swipe I make at Neiman Marcus." Jamal, Tasha's husband and the esteemed city councilman of District 4, leaned back in his chair, unbuttoning the collar of his crisp white dress shirt. He had a slick, polished demeanor that played well on local television, always shaking hands and kissing babies. But in private, he was just as ruthlessly opportunistic as the rest of them. He tapped his heavy silver steak knife against his champagne flute, demanding the table's attention. All right, settle down." Jamal stood up, raising his glass high into the air, a wide, predatory smile stretching across his face. "I want to propose a toast to my brother Darius. Not just for shedding a miserable, restrictive wife, but for executing the greatest legal heist in Fulton County history." Jamal paced slowly around his chair, gesturing animatedly as he spoke. You see, what Camille did not understand, what her small, lower-middle-class brain could not comprehend, is that Sterling Real Estate Enterprises is not just a company. It is a massive, untraceable gold mine, and she handed over 100% of the equity today because she was too stupid to look past the surface-level debt. She saw a few complicated tax structures and got scared. He stopped and pointed a finger directly at Darius. We played her perfectly. While she was busy stressing over payroll taxes and standard operating expenses, treating the business like a neighborhood lemonade stand. I was using my seat on the City Council Zoning Committee to fast-track the permits for the Southside Development Project. Do you all realize what that means? I bypassed 18 months of environmental reviews. I killed 3 public hearings. I rezoned a designated wetland into prime commercial real estate with a single stroke of my pen, and no one asked a single question because I buried the paperwork. Darius laughed loudly, raising his glass to Jamal. To the perks of having family in high places. Keep the permits flowing, brother, and I will keep the campaign donations rolling in. Exactly. Jamal continued, his voice growing louder, drunk on his own perceived brilliance. That land alone is worth $8 million, and Darius just secured sole ownership of it today. We funneled the city development grant straight into the company's accounts through those offshore LLCs we set up in the Cayman Islands. And Camille, the brilliant forensic auditor, was so emotionally exhausted by the divorce, so eager to just grab her kid and run, that she walked away without demanding a single forensic review of the asset portfolio. She left millions on the table because she was scared of a little legal debt. She practically gift-wrapped the entire operation for us. The table erupted into loud, raucous applause. Beatrice dabbed her mouth with a linen napkin, looking prouder of Jamal's political corruption than she ever had of his public service. That is right, Jamal. We protected our assets. We protected our family. We outsmarted her at every single turn. That is how you handle business in Atlanta. Darius raised his glass again, his eyes gleaming with greed. To the Sterling legacy, may it grow richer, stronger, and completely free of Camille's suffocating mediocrity. To the Sterling legacy, the table echoed in unison, the clinking of crystal ringing sharply through the private room. They were feasting like royalty. They were gloating without restraint. They were thoroughly enjoying the fantasy of their unchallenged supremacy. They talked over each other, planning how to remodel the Buckhead mansion. Jasmine enthusiastically discussed tearing down the custom nursery I had painted for my son Leo, wanting to replace it with a massive 2-story walk-in closet for her designer shoes. Beatrice chimed in, suggesting they use the company's newly acquired unscrutinized funds to buy a summer house in Martha's Vineyard, bragging about the summer parties she would host for the church elders. Tasha demanded Darius increase her monthly consulting fee from the company, a fee for a job she never actually showed up to do. They were mapping out a glorious, luxurious future built entirely on the fraudulent foundation they thought I had been too blind to see. They believed they were the smartest people in the room, the architects of a master plan that had flawlessly executed the removal of a useless wife while keeping all the treasure. They did not know that every arrogant word Jamal had just spoken, every boast about the illegal zoning permits, the city grants, and the offshore LLCs was exactly what the federal investigators had been waiting to hear. They did not realize that the debt I had walked away from today was not just standard legal debt, but a carefully documented, undeniable trail of federal tax evasion, wire fraud, and political money laundering. And they certainly did not expect the heavy oak doors of the private dining room to swing open, violently hitting the wall with a loud, resounding thud that echoed like a gunshot. The laughter died instantly. Jamal froze with his glass halfway to his mouth. Beatrice dropped her fork onto her porcelain plate with a clatter. Darius turned his head, his smug expression melting into one of pure, unadulterated shock. I stood in the doorway, framed by the warm ambient light of the main restaurant floor. I had not changed out of the simple, tailored gray suit I wore to the courthouse. My posture was perfectly straight, my shoulders back, my expression entirely unreadable. I stepped into the room, the heavy doors closing slowly behind me, sealing us inside. Camille Darius demanded, his voice thick with sudden anger and confusion. "What the hell are you doing here? How did you get past the host? This is a highly exclusive private room." Jasmine instinctively pulled her new Birkin bag closer to her chest, glaring at me as if she thought I had come to physically steal it from her. Tasha let out a loud, exaggerated sigh, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Are you seriously stalking us now? Did you run out of your $5,000 already? Do you need cab fare back to your depressing little apartment?" I ignored them. I did not say a single word. I walked slowly and deliberately across the thick plush carpet, moving straight toward the head of the table where Darius was sitting. The silence in the room was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the steady, rhythmic sound of my low heels stepping toward him. Darius stood up, puffing out his chest, trying to reassert his physical dominance. I said, "What are you doing here? I will call security right now and have you thrown out into the street like trash. You have no business being anywhere near me or my family ever again." I stopped right next to his chair. He was holding his freshly poured $500 glass of champagne, his knuckles turning white from how hard he was gripping the delicate crystal stem. He tried to look intimidating, but I could see the tiny bead of sweat forming at his temple. He was nervous. He knew I never acted without a reason. I reached into the pocket of my blazer. I pulled out a heavy, rusted iron key. It was the master key to the hidden safe in the basement of the Buckhead mansion, the safe where Darius kept his most sensitive, off-the-books physical ledgers. The ledgers detailing every bribe, every fake invoice, and every stolen dollar. The ledgers I had meticulously copied, cataloged, and handed over to Special Agent Miller 3 weeks ago. Without breaking eye contact with Darius, I held the heavy iron key directly over his hand. "I just wanted to return company property," I said softly. I opened my fingers. The heavy iron key dropped straight down. It slammed directly into the delicate crystal rim of Darius's champagne flute. The glass shattered instantly with a sharp, violent crack. Shards of crystal and expensive champagne exploded across the white linen tablecloth, splashing onto Darius's custom suit and soaking the front of Jasmine's dress. Jasmine let out a high-pitched, piercing scream as the cold champagne soaked right through the thin silk of her designer dress. She jumped back from the table so fast that her heavy wooden chair toppled over, crashing loudly onto the polished hardwood floor. She immediately clutched her pregnant stomach with both hands, throwing her head back and sobbing hysterically. "Are you completely crazy?" Jasmine wailed, tears perfectly welling up in her eyes as she looked at Darius. "My baby. You are stressing out my baby. Darius, do something right now. She is trying to hurt us because she is jealous of my life. Look what she did to my brand new dress." Darius swore loudly, frantically brushing the shattered glass and spilled alcohol off his expensive suit lapels. He looked completely unhinged, his suave billionaire persona shattering just as easily as the crystal flute I had just destroyed. Jamal jumped to his feet, grabbing a thick white linen napkin to dab at his own shirt, while Beatrice gasped, clutching her heavy pearl necklace as if I had just committed a violent crime right in front of her. "You have completely lost your mind," Darius shouted, stepping toward me with his fists clenched tightly at his sides. "Who do you think you are, barging in here and ruining our evening?" Before he could take another step toward me, Tasha stormed around the edge of the large dining table. Her diamond tennis bracelets clinked together aggressively as she marched right up to my face. Her eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated rage. She looked me up and down, her lip curling in absolute disgust as she took in my simple outfit. "Get out of here, you pathetic loser!" Tasha screamed, raising her hands and shoving me hard in the chest. "You do not belong in a place like this. You never did. Look at you in your cheap discount store blazer and scuffed shoes. You are an absolute embarrassment to this family. You are just mad because my brother finally traded up for a real woman instead of a miserable, flat-broke accountant who does not even know how to dress herself properly. Get your garbage clothes out of our private room right now before I call the police and have you dragged out of here in handcuffs." She lunged forward to push me a second time, but I did not stumble. I planted my feet firmly on the plush carpet and caught her right wrist mid-air. My grip was incredibly tight, locking her arm firmly in place. The sudden physical resistance shocked her so much that she froze immediately, her mouth hanging slightly open in pure disbelief. The entire room went dead silent. Even Jasmine stopped her fake sobbing to stare at us in shock. I stepped closer to Tasha, leaning in so the entire table could hear every single word I was about to say. I would be very careful about who you call flat broke, Tasha. I said, my voice eerily calm and entirely steady. Because right now, the only thing standing between you and absolute financial ruin is my good graces. Tasha tried to yank her arm away, her face flushing a deep, angry shade of red. Let go of me, you psycho. I do not know what you are talking about. Jamal, tell her to let me go right now. Jamal stepped forward, his chest puffed out as he tried to look like the authoritative, powerful politician he pretended to be on local television. Camille, you need to back off right now and leave my wife alone before I make a phone call to the precinct commander. I released Tasha's wrist slowly, letting her stumble backward into her husband's waiting arms. I smoothed down the front of my gray blazer, adjusted my cuffs, and looked directly into Jamal's eyes. You might want to hold off on that phone call, Jamal, I said smoothly, a dark smile playing on my lips. Because your lovely wife is keeping a massive financial secret from you, and it is going to severely impact your upcoming city council re-election campaign. What the hell are you talking about? Jamal demanded, looking rapidly from me to Tasha, whose face had suddenly drained of all its color. Do not listen to her, Jamal. Tasha stammered nervously, her voice trembling as she actively avoided making eye contact with him. She is just making things up because she is bitter that Darius left her. She is a liar. Throw her out. I did not break eye contact with Jamal for a single second. I raised my voice so it carried clearly and powerfully over the tense, suffocating silence of the private dining room. The Platinum American Express card ending in 4172, I announced loudly, reciting the exact account numbers from pure memory. The card registered under Tasha's maiden name to a hidden post office box located in downtown Decatur. The credit card that currently has an outstanding overdue balance of exactly $84,622. Tasha gasped sharply, clapping a manicured hand over her mouth. Jamal froze completely, his eyes widening in absolute horror as he turned to stare down at his wife. Beatrice let out a strangled, terrified noise from the back of the room, dropping her steak knife onto her china plate. That is right, Jamal. I continued, my voice sharp, piercing, and entirely merciless. $84,000 spent entirely on luxury handbags, expensive spa weekends, and underground cosmetic treatments. Massive debt she has been racking up in total secret for the last 3 years, while repeatedly telling you her little fashion boutique was turning a huge profit. And do you know why the aggressive collection agencies have not shown up at your front door to publicly humiliate a sitting city councilman? Do you know why your pristine political credit score is not completely ruined yet? Jamal looked absolutely paralyzed. He slowly turned his head to look back at me, the political arrogance completely wiped from his face. Why, he whispered, his voice shaking with anger and fear. Because I have been paying the absolute minimum balance out of my own personal checking account every single month for the last 2 years, I said, smiling coldly at Tasha, who was now visibly shaking from head to toe. Darius completely refused to give her the money, so she came crying to my doorstep. She begged me to save her marriage. She said you would file for divorce immediately if you ever found out how financially irresponsible she truly was. I felt incredibly sorry for her, but since she thinks my clothes are so remarkably cheap and I'm just a pathetic loser, I guess I will stop making those courtesy payments today. The next billing cycle officially closes in 3 days. Good luck paying off that $84,000, Jamal. I am absolutely sure your wealthy political donors will love hearing all about it when the story leaks to the press. Jamal whipped his head around to glare fiercely at Tasha, his face contorted with absolute unhinged fury. Is it true? He roared, his deep voice echoing violently off the expensive mahogany walls. Tell me right now, Tasha. Is it true? Tasha burst into real pathetic tears, shrinking away from him and covering her face with her hands. "I am so sorry," she sobbed loudly, her makeup running down her cheeks. "I just wanted to keep up with the other political wives. I did not want to look poor in front of your friends." The room immediately erupted into total uncontrollable chaos. Jamal started screaming viciously at Tasha, cursing loudly about his ruined campaign and his destroyed reputation. Darius yelled frantically at Jamal to lower his voice before the restaurant staff heard him and called the tabloids. Jasmine stood frozen in the corner, holding her expensive designer bag like a protective shield, looking completely terrified of the monster I had just unleashed upon their perfect evening. And then there was Beatrice. She had stood silently by and watched her seemingly perfect family begin to violently tear each other apart in a matter of mere seconds. The grand illusion of her flawless, wealthy, high-class bloodline was disintegrating right in front of her very eyes. She could not handle it. She could not handle the undeniable fact that I, the woman she viewed as nothing more than an uneducated, worthless peasant from the absolute wrong side of the tracks, was the one pulling every single string in the room. "Shut up!" Beatrice shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated hysteria. She grabbed the large crystal water goblet sitting next to her untouched plate. She marched aggressively toward the front of the table, her eyes burning with a hateful, vicious, and dangerous light. "You wicked, manipulative wretch!" Beatrice screamed at the top of her lungs. "You come in here and try to destroy my family. You try to tear us apart out of pure, unbridled spite. You are nothing but trash. You will always be trash." With a violent, erratic flick of her wrist, Beatrice hurled the heavy goblet forward. The freezing cold ice water splashed directly into my face, soaking my hair instantly and running rapidly down the crisp collar of my shirt. The heavy crystal glass hit my left shoulder hard before bouncing off and rolling away onto the thick patterned carpet. The sudden shocking physical assault made everyone in the room stop yelling instantly. Jamal and Tasha froze in their tracks. Darius stood perfectly still, his chest heaving heavily as he stared at his mother in disbelief. They all waited with bated breath for me to react. They fully expected me to scream. They expected me to cry. They expected me to completely lose my temper and physically attack Beatrice, which would finally give them the perfect excuse they desperately needed to call the police, play the innocent victims, and have me arrested for assault. I did not give them the satisfaction. I stood perfectly still, the freezing cold water dripping slowly from my chin onto my gray suit jacket. I calmly reached into my pocket, pulled out a small, neatly folded tissue, and methodically patted my face dry. I wiped the cold water from my eyelids. I smoothed my damp hair back into its original place. My breathing never hitched once. My hands never shook at all. I looked directly at Beatrice. The furious, hateful fire in her eyes slowly flickered and died, quickly replaced by a deep, creeping sense of absolute dread. She suddenly realized her desperate attack had done absolutely nothing to break me. I was completely untouchable. I folded the damp tissue carefully, dropped it onto the table, right next to the shattered champagne glass, and turned my full attention back to Darius. He looked completely and utterly defeated. The wealthy swagger was entirely gone. The fake billionaire persona had evaporated into thin air. He was just a pathetic little man standing in a messy puddle of expensive champagne, surrounded by a toxic family that was actively collapsing around him. I looked him dead in the eye and offered him a warm, genuinely chilling smile. "Enjoy the steak, Darius," I said, my voice ringing out clearly and flawlessly in the silent room. "Because it is the very last meal you will ever eat with metal utensils." I turned my back on the entire Sterling family and walked slowly toward the heavy oak doors. I reached confidently for the brass handle, pulling it open effortlessly to reveal the busy, softly lit restaurant floor waiting outside. Just as I took my very first step out of the stifling room, a sharp, urgent, and incredibly loud sound pierced the heavy silence behind me. It was Darius's cell phone ringing violently from inside his ruined suit jacket pocket. I paused momentarily in the doorway, glancing back briefly over my shoulder. Darius frantically reached into his wet pocket and pulled out the vibrating phone. He stared down at the glowing caller ID, his handsome face instantly turning the sickly color of pale ash. His hand started to tremble uncontrollably as he stared at the screen. "It is," Richard Darius whispered, his voice cracking with sheer undeniable panic. "It is my corporate lawyer. Why is he calling me at 9 o'clock at night?" I did not wait around to watch him answer it. I simply stepped out of the room, pulled the heavy doors firmly shut behind me, and walked away into the cool Atlanta night. The trap had been fully sprung, and there was absolutely no way out for any of them. I stood in the dimly lit hallway of the restaurant, the thick patterned carpet muffling the sound of the busy dining room behind me. I had pulled the heavy oak doors shut, but I did not walk away immediately. I leaned against the cool mahogany paneled wall, adjusting the lapels of my damp blazer. I knew exactly what was about to happen on the other side of that wood, and I wanted to hear every single agonizing second of it. The acoustics of the expensive private dining room were designed to keep conversations in, but the gap beneath the heavy doors allowed the escalating chaos to spill out perfectly into the quiet corridor. Inside the room, Darius was desperately trying to salvage his shattered ego. He had just been humiliated in front of his new mistress, his mother, and his aggressively arrogant sister. I could hear him taking a deep, shaky breath, trying to force the swagger back into his voice. He needed to prove to his family that he was still the undisputed king of his empire, that my little stunt with the safe key was nothing more than the bitter flailing of a defeated woman. "It is just," Richard Darius announced to the room, his voice artificially loud and laced with forced confidence. "My corporate attorney. He is probably calling to confirm that the judge officially processed the final asset transfers from the divorce settlement today. Let me put him on speakerphone so you can all hear the good news. We are going to close out this night with a reminder of exactly how much we won today." I smiled to myself, crossing my arms over my chest. Darius was so painfully predictable. His need for constant validation was his greatest weakness, and putting his lawyer on speakerphone in a room full of people was exactly the kind of arrogant misstep I had counted on. There was a brief electronic beep as Darius pressed the speaker button on his phone and set it down on the center of the dining table, right next to the shattered remains of his $500 champagne glass. "Richard," my man, Darius said smoothly, projecting his voice so everyone in the room could hear his authority. "You are on speakerphone with the family. Tell me the good news. Did the court finalize the transfer of the Buckhead mansion and the commercial properties into my sole possession?" There was no polite greeting from the other end of the line. There was no congratulatory laugh. Instead, the unmistakable sound of absolute unfiltered panic blasted through the tiny phone speaker. Richard was hyperventilating. In the background of his call, there was a deafening commotion. I could clearly hear heavy boots stomping across hardwood floors, file cabinets being slammed open, and men shouting distinct authoritative orders. "Darius, where the hell are you?" Richard screamed, his voice cracking violently. His usual calm, measured legal tone was completely gone, replaced by the frantic shrieking of a man watching his entire career burn to the ground. Darius faltered, his fake confidence instantly evaporating. "I am at Chops in Buckhead. We are having a celebration dinner." "Richard, calm down. What is all that noise in the background? What is going on over there?" "The federal government is what is going on over here," Richard roared into the phone. "The FBI and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division just raided the corporate headquarters. They breached the glass doors 10 minutes ago with tactical gear and federal warrants. They have completely locked down the entire building. They are boxing up every single hard drive, every physical ledger, and every tax return from the last 7 years. They just seized my personal laptop. Darius, they have everything." The silence inside the private dining room was so absolute it felt like a vacuum had sucked all the oxygen out of the space. I could practically picture the blood draining from Beatrice's face. I could imagine Jasmine clutching her designer bag, suddenly realizing it was bought with stolen money. "What are you talking about?" Darius demanded, his voice suddenly pitching up into a high, breathless register. That is impossible. We are a legitimate real estate development firm. There has to be a mistake. Call the precinct commander. Call the mayor. Tell them to back off immediately. Are you completely out of your mind? Richard yelled, the sheer desperation in his voice echoing sharply into the hallway. This is not the local police department, you absolute fool. This is a coordinated federal takedown. The lead agent just handed me a warrant that specifically lists wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, and the illegal embezzlement of city development funds. They have detailed financial maps of the offshore LLCs in the Cayman Islands. They know exactly how you funneled the municipal grants into your private accounts. Jamal let out a loud, terrifying gasp. The mention of the municipal grants meant his direct political involvement had been exposed. I heard a heavy chair scrape violently against the floor as Jamal practically jumped to his feet. Listen to me. Richard Darius stammered his words, stumbling over each other in a blind panic. Listen. We have protection. The corporate structure is layered. It will take them years to untangle the shell companies. Just invoke attorney-client privilege and stall them. My ex-wife was the head forensic accountant. She managed all the ledgers. We can just say she manipulated the books without my knowledge. We will throw all the blame on Camille. I leaned closer to the door, a dark sense of satisfaction washing over me. He was still trying to use me as his human shield, but Richard's next words shattered that delusion into a million unfixable pieces. You cannot blame Camille, you complete idiot! Richard screamed, his voice reaching a hysterical pitch. Why do you think they waited until tonight to raid the building? Why do you think they waited until the judge slammed his gavel today? What do you mean? Darius asked, his voice shrinking into a pathetic, terrified whisper. Why did you insist on taking 100% ownership of the company in the divorce today? Richard shrieked, practically sobbing into the receiver. You thought you were winning. You thought you were legally boxing her out of your wealth. But you did not read the final indemnification clauses carefully enough. Camille drafted that settlement agreement herself. By aggressively demanding sole, undivided ownership of Sterling Real Estate Enterprises, you legally absorbed every single ounce of the fraudulent offshore debt. Richard paused to catch his breath, his next words hitting the room like a series of targeted missile strikes. She removed her name from all corporate liability, Darius. She legally transferred all the toxic assets, all the forged bank loans, and all the falsified tax burdens entirely to you. You signed it all in front of a sitting judge. She indemnified herself completely. She is legally classified as an innocent spouse and a cooperating federal whistleblower. She handed you a ticking time bomb and you eagerly signed your name on it to prove how powerful you are. You own the fraud now, all of it. No. Darius breathed the word, barely escaping his throat. No, no, no. That cannot be right. The lawyers reviewed it. You reviewed it. I reviewed the standard asset sheets, Richard yelled defensively. I did not know she had a shadow set of books detailing your illegal bribes. You kept me entirely in the dark about the Cayman accounts. The federal agents are literally walking out of the building with the physical evidence right now. Your bank accounts have already been frozen. Your credit cards are dead. The Buckhead mansion is locked down as a product of criminal enterprise. Darius, you have absolutely nothing left, and they are coming for you next. Get a criminal defense attorney right now, because I am officially resigning as your legal counsel. The line went dead with a sharp click. Inside the room, the silence was agonizing. It lasted for exactly 3 seconds before the entire Sterling family completely imploded. Jasmine was the first to react. She let out a guttural, terrified wail, screaming that she was going to have her baby in a federal prison. Tasha began hyperventilating, sobbing uncontrollably, as she realized her credit card debt was no longer her biggest problem. Her boutique was funded by the same dirty money the FBI was currently seizing. Beatrice began praying loudly, begging the Lord to save her family from the wicked trap I had set for them, completely ignoring the fact that they had dug their own graves through sheer unchecked greed. But it was Jamal who reacted with the most violence. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the room as Jamal swept his arm across the table, knocking plates and crystal onto the floor. I heard the heavy, sickening thud of a body being slammed forcefully against the mahogany-paneled wall. "You stupid, arrogant son of a bitch!" Jamal roared, his voice trembling with a level of rage I had never heard from him before. My political campaign funds were tied up in those company accounts. My re-election money was sitting in the Cayman LLCs. "Get your hands off me!" Darius yelled back, his voice strained and panicked as he struggled against his brother-in-law. "It is not my fault. She set us up. Camille set us up." "You did this," Jamal screamed, the sound of a fist connecting hard with bone echoing through the door. "You let your ego blind you. You just had to prove you were the smartest man in the courtroom today. You took all the assets to leave her with nothing, and you dragged me down with you. I am a sitting city councilman. The municipal grants I approved for your fake zoning projects have my signature on them. When the feds trace that money, they are going to indict me for political corruption. My career is completely over. I am going to federal prison because you could not keep your financial house in order. I am your family," Darius pleaded, his voice breaking as Jamal shoved him against the wall again. "We can fix this. I will call the governor." "There is no fixing this," Jamal barked, his voice filled with pure venom. "The FBI does not raid corporate headquarters unless they already have an airtight case. Your ex-wife has been feeding them our internal documents for months. She wore a wire. She had access to everything. She played you for a complete fool, Darius." I stood in the hallway, letting the beautiful, chaotic symphony of their mutual destruction wash over me. The golden child was falling. The corrupt politician was breaking. The matriarch was watching her empire turn to dust. I reached into my bag, pulled out my car keys, and walked away from the heavy oak doors, leaving them to tear each other apart inside their expensive cage. I did not stay to watch the federal agents drag Darius out of the steakhouse in handcuffs. I did not need to. The morning news broadcast provided a much better angle anyway. I sat quietly at my small kitchen table the next morning, sipping my black coffee, while the local news anchor narrated the spectacular downfall of the Sterling family empire. The footage showed Darius, his expensive custom suit heavily wrinkled and stained with champagne, being forcefully shoved into the back of a dark federal transport vehicle. His face was pale, his eyes darting frantically toward the cameras flashing in the dark. The news banner flashing across the bottom of the screen called it the most extensive real estate corruption sweep in Fulton County history. I turned off the tablet, savoring the absolute silence of my modest two-bedroom apartment. It was a beautiful, peaceful morning, but I knew the tranquility would not last. The Sterling family was like a cornered animal, and cornered animals always lash out. Right on cue, a violent, frantic pounding echoed through my apartment. The heavy knocks rattled the cheap brass fixtures on my front door. It was not a polite knock. It was the desperate, aggressive hammering of someone who was completely losing their grip on reality. I calmly set my coffee mug down on the counter, walked slowly across the living room, and checked the peephole. It was Tasha. Her usually flawless hair was a tangled, frizzy mess. Her designer sunglasses were pushed crookedly atop her head, and she was still wearing the same cocktail dress from the disaster at the steakhouse the night before. Her makeup was severely smudged around her eyes, giving her the crazed look of a woman who had not slept a single second. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Before I could even say a single word, Tasha shoved her way violently past me, marching right into the center of my living room, like she still owned my entire existence. "Fix this right now!" Tasha screamed, spinning around to face me. Her voice was completely hoarse from yelling the night before. "You need to call whoever you talked to at the federal building and tell them you made a mistake. You need to tell them you were angry about the divorce and you falsified those documents. You have to fix this, Camille." I calmly closed the front door, making sure the lock clicked into place before I turned to look at her. I crossed my arms over my chest, staring at her with total detachment. "I am not calling anyone, Tasha. Your brother made his choices. He signed the final papers. He took the assets and he took the fraud. It is completely out of my hands now. You are a liar, Tasha shrieked, her hands balling into tight fists at her sides. You engineered this entire nightmare. Darius spent the whole night in a federal holding cell. Jamal has locked himself in our guest bedroom and is refusing to speak to me because his political donors are already dropping him. My mother is currently packing up her expensive china because the bank served her with a foreclosure notice at 6 o'clock this morning. You destroyed my family because you were jealous of our success. I walked past her, moving into the kitchen to pour myself another cup of coffee. Your family destroyed itself, I replied smoothly. I just provided the federal government with the accurate accounting records. What Darius did with those municipal grants was highly illegal, and you all happily benefited from it. Tasha marched after me, slamming her manicured hands down hard on my kitchen counter. She leaned in, her eyes burning with pure, unadulterated venom. You listen to me, you pathetic little nobody. You think you have won because Darius is in jail. You think you are so incredibly smart, but you clearly forgot who runs this city. I sit on the board of every major charity foundation in Atlanta. I know every single socialite, every wealthy investor, and every elite business owner in Fulton County. If you do not march down to that federal building right now and recant your entire statement, I will completely destroy your life. I will make sure your name is blacklisted at every accounting firm in the state. I will ruin your professional reputation so badly that you will not even be able to get a job bringing up groceries at the local supermarket. You will be completely exiled. You will be nothing. She stood up straight, breathing heavily, clearly expecting me to cower in fear. She honestly believed her country club connections held more power than the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She thought her high society gossip could somehow intimidate a woman who had just successfully dismantled a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. I looked at her angry, desperate face, and I did not feel threatened. I did not feel angry. I just felt a deep, overwhelming sense of amusement. I threw my head back and laughed. It was a loud, genuine, belly-deep laugh that echoed off the walls of my small kitchen. Tasha flinched, stepping back slightly as if my laughter had physically struck her. What is so funny? She snapped, her confidence visibly wavering. You are funny, Tasha, I said, wiping a small tear of amusement from the corner of my eye. You stand in my kitchen wearing clothes bought with stolen money, threatening to ruin my professional reputation. You think your little charity boards and your rich friends will save you? But you are completely missing the most important part of this entire situation. I walked over to the small dining table where my silver laptop was sitting. I opened the screen, entered my secure password, and pulled up a highly detailed, deeply complex financial spreadsheet. I turned the laptop around so it was facing her. Come here, Tasha. Take a really good look at your beloved high society reputation. Tasha hesitated for a second before stepping closer to the table. Her eyes darted nervously across the screen, scanning the endless rows of highlighted numbers, vendor invoices, and complex banking routes. What is this? She asked defensively. I do not understand any of this accounting garbage. I know you do not, I said, my voice dropping to a cold, clinical tone. That is exactly why Darius asked me to manage it. This is the master ledger for your upscale fashion boutique, Tasha. The boutique you proudly flaunt on social media. The boutique you claim is a massive independent success that proves you are a brilliant female entrepreneur. Tasha swallowed hard, her eyes glued to the glowing screen. So what? My boutique is highly successful. I sell out of my inventory every single month. No, you do not, I corrected her sharply. You do not sell anything. Your boutique has never actually turned a single dollar of legitimate profit since the day you opened the doors 3 years ago. You have absolutely no real customers. You have fake invoices. I pointed to a specific column on the spreadsheet. Do you see these massive inventory purchases? These are payments made from your boutique to a textile supplier in the Cayman Islands, a supplier that does not actually exist. Your brother Darius set up that fake shell company. He took the stolen city development funds, funneled them into your boutique under the guise of fake business loans, and then you used that money to pay the fake vendor in the Caymans. You washed the money clean, Tasha. Your beautiful high society fashion boutique is nothing but a heavily organized money laundering front for your brother. Tasha gasped, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. That is not true, she whispered, shaking her head in aggressive denial. Darius told me he was just helping me with my startup costs. I did not know where the money came from. I just ordered the clothes and ran the store. Ignorance is not a valid legal defense when your signature is on every single fraudulent wire transfer, I replied mercilessly. Darius used your vanity to mask his crimes. He knew you desperately wanted to look like a successful businesswoman in front of your wealthy friends, so he funded your delusion. And I tracked every single penny of it. I know about the $84,000 in secret credit card debt. I know about the fake vendor payments. I know exactly how much dirty money is sitting in your corporate accounts right now. Tasha began to hyperventilate. Her chest heaved rapidly as the walls of her perfect, arrogant world finally closed in entirely. You cannot show this to anyone, she pleaded, her voice cracking with pure terror. Please, Camille. If Jamal finds out I am legally tied to the money laundering, he will definitely divorce me. The feds will come after me. I will lose my spot on the charity boards. My friends will completely disown me. I will have to go to prison. You should have thought about that before you spent the last 5 years treating me like absolute garbage, I said, slamming the laptop shut with a loud final crack. You called me a pathetic loser. You mocked my clothes. You shoved me in that restaurant and threatened to have me arrested. You took my silent compliance for weakness. You thought because I did not wear designer labels, I was too stupid to see what was actually happening right in front of my face. Tasha fell to her knees, grabbing the fabric of my jeans. Please, she sobbed, tears pouring down her ruined face. Please do not give that ledger to the authorities. I will do anything. I will publicly apologize to you. I will give you back all the money I owe you for the credit cards. I will make sure Darius gives you half of whatever is left. Just delete the file, Camille. I am begging you. I looked down at her. The arrogant, untouchable sister-in-law, who had made my life a living hell, was now groveling on my cheap apartment floor begging for mercy she absolutely did not deserve. I felt nothing but cold, clinical satisfaction. I reached down and gently peeled her desperate fingers off my jeans. I stepped back, opened the laptop once more, and tapped the trackpad to wake up the screen. I navigated quickly to my secure email client. The boutique ledger was already attached to a pre-written message addressed to Special Agent Miller at the FBI and the lead investigator at the IRS. I looked down at Tasha. Her eyes were wide with panic, watching my hand hover over the keyboard. I just pressed send, I said, calmly hitting the enter key with a satisfying click. I just forwarded your boutique's master ledger to the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They operate very quickly when they have hard evidence. You have about 20 minutes before they freeze your entire accounts. Tasha let out a horrific guttural scream. She collapsed entirely onto the hallway floor, curling into a tight fetal position as her luxurious fake life violently shattered into pieces. I stepped carefully over Tasha's sobbing body, grabbed my keys from the console table, and walked out of my apartment. I had a busy day ahead of me, and I was not going to let the pathetic tears of a disgraced socialite slow me down. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the intense summer heat had baked the pavement outside of Leo's elementary school. I stood near the edge of the student pickup zone waiting patiently for the final bell to ring. The street was lined with idling minivans and chatting parents completely unaware of the massive federal scandal brewing just a few miles away in the city center. I checked my watch, keeping a careful eye on the heavy double doors of the school building. I was looking forward to taking my son out for ice cream, completely free from the suffocating grip of his father's toxic family. But the Sterling family was not quite finished with me yet. Before the school bell even had a chance to ring, a heavy hand grabbed my upper arm. The grip was tight, bruising, and aggressively violent. I was violently spun around, my purse slipping off my shoulder and hitting the concrete sidewalk. I found myself staring directly into the bloodshot, furious eyes of Jamal. He looked absolutely nothing like the polished, charismatic city councilman who smiled on local television broadcasts. His expensive silk tie was torn loose, his dress shirt was deeply wrinkled, and he smelled strongly of stale alcohol and pure desperation. He had clearly spent the entire morning watching his political career completely evaporate, and he was desperately looking for someone to punish. "Listen to me very carefully," Jamal hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly whisper. He leaned in so close I could feel his hot breath against my cheek. "You have completely ruined my life. My campaign manager just resigned. The mayor is refusing to take my phone calls. The local news stations are already running segments about my connection to Darius and those illegal municipal grants. You are going to march down to the federal prosecutor right now, and you are going to swear under oath that Darius forged my signature on every single one of those zoning permits. You are going to take the blame for the accounting errors, or I swear to God I will destroy you." I glanced down calmly at his hand, which was still gripping my arm tight enough to leave deep purple bruises. "Take your hand off me, Jamal," I said softly. "We are standing in the middle of an elementary school pickup line. Do you really want to add public assault to your rapidly growing list of criminal charges today?" Jamal did not let go. Instead, his grip tightened, his fingernails digging sharply into my skin. He sneered, his face contorting into a mask of pure malice. "You think you are so incredibly smart, Camille. You think because you handed over a few spreadsheets you hold all the power. You are forgetting who I am. I am a sitting city councilman in Atlanta. I have power you cannot even begin to comprehend. I sit on the board of judicial appointments. I have family court judges in my pocket, judges who owe me their entire careers." He stepped even closer, backing me aggressively against the chain-link fence of the schoolyard. "If you do not fix this right now, I will personally see to it that you never see your son again." Jamal threatened, his eyes wide and completely unhinged. "I will make one phone call, and I will have a judge declare you an unfit mother. I will claim you are mentally unstable. I will have Child Protective Services rip Leo right out of your arms before the sun goes down today. I will place him in the foster system, or better yet, I will have Beatrice file for emergency custody. You will lose your child, Camille. I will make sure you die entirely alone." I did not panic. I did not cry out for help. I did not struggle against his painful grip. I just stared back at him with absolute terrifying calm. His threat to take my son was the ultimate desperate move of a weak man, and it confirmed exactly how little he actually knew about the situation he was in. "Are you quite finished?" I asked, my voice as cold as ice. Jamal blinked, momentarily thrown off balance by my total lack of fear. "What is wrong with you?" he growled. "Did you not just hear what I said? I will take your son." "You will not take anything, Jamal," I replied, stepping forward and forcing him to loosen his grip. "You are not going to call any judges. You are not going to call Child Protective Services. You are going to let go of my arms, step back, and listen to exactly how badly you have miscalculated your own intelligence." Jamal dropped his hand, looking at me with a mixture of rage and sudden creeping uncertainty. "Do you remember the family cookout we had 3 months ago on Memorial Day?" I asked, keeping my voice low and conversational. "The one at the Buckhead mansion. Darius was grilling steaks by the pool. Beatrice was bragging to her church friends about your upcoming re-election campaign. Tasha was drinking expensive wine and complaining about the cost of her country club membership." "What does a stupid cookout have to do with anything?" Jamal snapped, looking around nervously as a few parents started to glance in our direction. "Everything," I stated flatly. "Because you and I had a very interesting conversation that afternoon. We were standing in the kitchen, away from the rest of the family. You had consumed 4 glasses of scotch. You were feeling incredibly confident, completely untouchable. You thought I was just the quiet, submissive wife who handled the boring paperwork, so you decided to brag to me. You wanted to prove how much smarter you were than Darius." Jamal swallowed hard, the color slowly draining from his face. "I do not remember talking to you about anything important." "Oh, but you did." I continued my words, cutting through his denial like a sharp knife. You told me exactly how you diverted those municipal development grants. You bragged about how easy it was to bypass the environmental reviews for the Southside project. You specifically said, and I quote, "The city treasury is basically my personal piggy bank, and nobody on the council is smart enough to notice." You laughed about it, Jamal. You laughed about stealing taxpayer money to fund your luxury lifestyle and Tasha's shopping habits. Jamal stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You have no proof of that conversation," he stammered, his voice trembling slightly. "It is your word against mine. I am a respected public official. You are just a bitter ex-wife trying to smear my good name. Nobody is going to believe you over me." I smiled. It was a slow, predatory smile that made Jamal instinctively take a step backward. "It is not just my word, Jamal, because while you were busy drinking scotch and bragging about your political corruption, I was wearing a highly sensitive federally issued recording device taped securely beneath my blouse." Jamal gasped sharply, his hands flying to his head in pure shock. "No, you are lying. You did not wear a wire to a family barbecue." "I absolutely did," I confirmed, savoring the absolute terror washing over his face. "I wore it to the Memorial Day cookout. I wore it to Tasha's birthday dinner. I wore it to every single family gathering for the last 90 days. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has over 40 hours of crystal-clear audio featuring you, Darius, and Tasha openly discussing your criminal enterprises. I caught every single brag, every single confession, and every single drunken joke you made about defrauding the city of Atlanta. The agents did not even have to work hard to build the case. You literally handed them a recorded confession on a silver platter because your massive ego simply would not allow you to stay quiet." Jamal began to shake uncontrollably. He looked like he was going to be physically sick right there on the sidewalk. "You recorded us," he whispered, the reality of his impending doom finally crashing down upon him. "You set a trap for your own family." "You are not my family," I corrected him sharply. "You never were. You were just a group of greedy, arrogant parasites who used me to clean up your messes while treating me like dirt. And now the ride is officially over." Jamal lunged forward, pure desperation taking over his completely shattered mind. He grabbed my shoulders, shaking me violently. "Give me the recordings," he screamed, completely ignoring the shocked gasps of the parents standing nearby. "Tell them it was deep-fake audio. Tell them you fabricated the tapes. You have to save me, Camille. I am a city councilman. I cannot go to federal prison. They will completely destroy me in there." I easily pushed his hands off my shoulders, brushing my sleeves as if his touch had contaminated me. "I cannot give you the recordings, Jamal. The federal agents already have them securely stored in their evidence lockers. In fact, they have been listening to them very closely all morning." Jamal backed away, stumbling over his own feet. He looked completely broken, his political career and his freedom entirely gone. He looked frantically down the street, as if he was contemplating making a run for it. "Do not bother running," I advised him smoothly, pointing a manicured finger toward the busy intersection directly across the street. Jamal slowly turned his head to follow my gaze. Parked legally in the red zone directly across from the school was a massive pitch-black tactical SUV with heavily tinted windows. It looked completely out of place among the row of family minivans and sensible sedans. "Watch the window," I told him quietly. As if on cue, the dark-tinted glass of the rear passenger window slowly rolled down. Sitting in the back seat, staring directly at Jamal with an expression of pure, unyielding authority, was the district attorney of Fulton County. Sitting right next to him was Special Agent Miller of the FBI, holding a thick manila folder completely filled with federal warrants. Jamal's knees completely buckled. He grabbed onto the cold metal of the chain-link fence to keep himself from collapsing onto the concrete. He realized in that exact moment that the trap was not just closing, it had already snapped entirely shut, and he was already standing right inside it. I left Jamal clinging to the fence like a discarded rag and walked back toward the school entrance just as the final bell rang. The heavy doors swung open, and a flood of children poured out into the afternoon sun. I spotted Leo immediately, his bright backpack bouncing as he ran toward me with a wide, innocent smile. I scooped him up, hugging him tightly, feeling a profound sense of relief that he would never have to grow up under the toxic, manipulative shadow of his father or his arrogant relatives ever again. We walked to my car, drove to his favorite ice cream parlor, and spent the next hour talking about his science project and his friends. I completely ignored the constant buzzing of my phone, knowing it was likely just more frantic calls from the various members of the Sterling family, as their entire world violently collapsed around them. By the time we finally returned to my apartment building, the late afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting long, peaceful shadows across the courtyard. I held Leo by the hand as we walked through the glass double doors into the secure, heavily monitored lobby of my building. I was planning to make a simple dinner help him with his homework and enjoy a quiet evening. But the moment I stepped onto the polished tile floor, my peaceful evening was instantly shattered. Sitting on one of the velvet lobby sofas looking like she had aged 20 years in a single night was Beatrice. She did not look like the proud, untouchable matriarch of the Sterling family anymore. The expensive, perfectly tailored church suits she usually wore had been replaced by a wrinkled blouse and a hastily thrown-on cardigan. Her signature pearl necklace was missing. Her hair, usually styled into an immaculate stiff perfection, was completely flat and disheveled. She looked frantic, her eyes darting nervously around the quiet lobby. The building concierge was standing nervously behind his desk, holding the telephone receiver, clearly debating whether he should call the police to have her forcefully removed. "Mommy." "Who is that?" Leo asked quietly, squeezing my hand as he noticed the strange, erratic energy radiating from his grandmother. I knelt down to his eye level, giving him a reassuring smile. "It is just your grandmother's sweetheart, but she and I need to have a very boring adult conversation. I want you to go over to the concierge desk. Mr. Henderson has some coloring books behind the counter. You stay right there until I come get you, okay?" Leo nodded happily and skipped over to the desk. I stood up, smoothing down my shirt, and walked slowly toward the velvet sofa. Beatrice had finally spotted me. She shot up from the couch so fast she nearly tripped over her own expensive shoes. She rushed toward me, her hands reaching out in a desperate, pleading gesture. Camille Beatrice gasped, her voice completely stripped of its usual haughty arrogance. "Thank God you are here. I have been waiting in this lobby for 3 hours." The man at the desk refused to let me upstairs. "You have to listen to me. Please, you have to listen to me right now." I crossed my arms over my chest, taking a deliberate step back so she could not physically touch me. "How did you get into this building, Beatrice? This is a secure residence." I slipped in behind a delivery driver. She admitted, her voice trembling with pure panic. "I had to see you. I had nowhere else to go. Darius is still in federal custody. The lawyers are demanding a massive retainer fee that we absolutely cannot pay because all the accounts are completely frozen. The news vans are parked outside the church, Camille. They are interviewing the congregation. They are completely ruining our good name." "That sounds like a terrible personal problem," I replied coldly, my expression entirely unreadable. "But it has absolutely nothing to do with me. Your son made his own decisions. Now he gets to experience the consequences." Beatrice let out a ragged, desperate sob. She looked around the lobby, suddenly hyper-aware of the fact that the concierge was watching her completely unravel. But instead of collecting herself, instead of relying on the fierce, arrogant pride that had defined her entire existence, she did the exact opposite. The mighty, untouchable Beatrice Sterling completely collapsed. She dropped to her knees right there on the hard tile floor of the lobby. She slumped forward, grabbing the fabric of my pants, tears streaming rapidly down her wrinkled face. It was a pathetic, shocking display. This was the woman who had spent the last 11 years telling me I was not good enough to sit at her dinner table. This was the woman who had mocked my upbringing, insulted my parents, and treated me like an unpaid servant. And now she was literally crawling at my feet. "Please, Camille. Beatrice begged loudly, completely abandoning whatever tiny shred of dignity she had left. You have to stop this. You are the only one who can stop this. Call the federal agents. Tell them you were angry and you made a mistake with the accounting. Tell them you moved the money by accident. You can fix this. You have to save my son. He is the father of your child. We are family. You cannot do this to your own family. The word family hung in the air, heavy and deeply offensive. I looked down at her sobbing form, feeling absolutely no pity. My heart was a solid block of ice. Family. I repeated, my voice echoing sharply across the quiet lobby. You have the absolute audacity to sit on my floor and use that word. You do not know the first thing about family, Beatrice. You know about status. You know about wealth. You know about using people until they are completely empty and then throwing them away. We are family, she cried out again, her grip tightening on my pants. God teaches us to forgive. You have to show mercy. You have to look into your heart and forgive us. I grabbed her hands and forcefully peeled them off my clothing. I stepped back, forcing her to look up at my face. I am not God, Beatrice, and I am entirely fresh out of mercy. You want to talk about family? Let us talk about the day my mother died. Beatrice froze, her sobbing instantly hitching in her throat. Her eyes widened slightly, a flash of genuine guilt and terror crossing her features. Do you remember that day? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, deadly whisper, because I remember every single second of it. It was 4 years ago. It was 2 days before Christmas. I had just gotten the phone call from the hospital that my mother had passed away from pancreatic cancer. I was sitting on the floor of the nursery, holding Leo, absolutely destroyed. My entire world had just collapsed. I was planning a funeral when I should have been wrapping presents. Beatrice swallowed hard, looking away from my piercing gaze. Camille. Please, that was a long time ago. Look at me, I commanded harshly, my voice cracking like a whip. She flinched and slowly looked back up. Do you remember what you said to me that day, Beatrice? You walked into the nursery. You did not hug me. You did not offer to help with the baby. You did not offer a single word of comfort. You looked at me sitting on the floor crying over my dead mother, and you told me to stop being so dramatic because Darius was hosting a holiday dinner for his real estate investors in 3 hours, and I needed to get downstairs and serve the appetizers. Tears of pure anger welled up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I stood tall, staring down at the woman who had broken my spirit for years. I told you I could not do it. I continued, my voice shaking with perfectly controlled rage. I told you my mother was dead and I needed to go to the hospital. And do you remember your exact words to me, Beatrice? You looked down your nose at me and said, people die every day, Camille. Your mother was just a factory worker. It is not like she left behind a massive legacy to mourn. Wipe your face, put on a nice dress, and get downstairs before you embarrass my son in front of people who actually matter. The lobby was dead silent. Even the concierge had stopped pretending not to listen, staring at Beatrice with an expression of absolute disgust. You told me my mother did not matter, I whispered fiercely. You told me my grief was an inconvenience to your dinner party. You proved to me in that exact moment that you never saw me as family. You saw me as an accessory. You saw me as the hired help. You saw me as a pathetic little peasant who should be endlessly grateful just to breathe the same air as the wealthy, powerful Sterling family. Beatrice put her hands over her face, sobbing loudly into her palms. I was wrong, she wailed. I was so wrong, Camille. I am a sinful, foolish woman. I will apologize every day for the rest of my life. Just please do not let them send my son to federal prison. Do not take away everything we have. I am not taking anything away, I replied coldly. The federal government is simply reclaiming the millions of dollars you stole from the taxpayers of this city. Beatrice suddenly scrambled to her feet. She was shaking uncontrollably, desperate to find a single piece of leverage. She reached into her wrinkled cardigan pocket and pulled out a heavy set of keys on a silver ring. I will give you the house, Beatrice said, frantically shoving the keys toward my chest. I will give you the Buckhead mansion. It is worth $4 million. It is completely paid off. You can have the title. You can have the furniture. You can have all of it. Just call the prosecutor. Tell them Darius is innocent. Take the house, Camille. Take the keys right now. She was trying to bribe me with her most prized possession. She was trying to buy her son's freedom with the very same house she had constantly used to make me feel small and insignificant. It was the ultimate pathetic act of a woman who had completely run out of options. I looked at the keys dangling from her shaking hand. I did not reach for them. I reached into my own purse, pulling out a folded piece of heavy legal paper. It was a document Special Agent Miller had emailed to me that morning straight from the Federal Asset Forfeiture Division. I slowly unfolded the paper and held it up right in front of her tear-stained face. You cannot give me the Buckhead mansion. Beatrice, I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. Beatrice stared at the paper, her eyes scanning the bold black letters at the top of the page. It was an official notice of federal seizure. The mansion was heavily leveraged against the Southside Commercial Development Project, I explained smoothly, watching the final spark of hope completely die in her eyes. Darius used the house as collateral to secure the fraudulent municipal grants. Because the grants were stolen, the collateral is automatically forfeited to the state. The bank seized the property an hour ago. The federal agents are probably putting the padlocks on the wrought iron gates right this very second. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear the absolute finality in my words. You do not have a mansion to bargain with, Beatrice. You do not have a fortune. You do not have a legacy. You are homeless. And you can take your fake apologies and your stolen keys and get out of my building before I have you arrested for trespassing. Beatrice let out a weak, breathless gasp. The silver keys slipped from her trembling fingers, hitting the hard tile floor with a loud, depressing clatter. She stared at the federal foreclosure notice in my hand, her mouth opening and closing silently. Her entire world, her entire identity had just been completely erased. She had nothing left. She had absolutely no one to save her. I turned my back on her, walked over to the concierge desk, took my son by the hand, and calmly walked toward the elevator, leaving the ruined matriarch of the Sterling family standing alone in the lobby, with absolutely nothing but the bitter, miserable consequences of her own terrible actions. The next morning, I woke up feeling a profound sense of peace that I had not experienced in over a decade. The air in my apartment felt lighter, the morning sun streaming through the windows felt warmer, and the heavy, suffocating weight of the Sterling family was finally lifted entirely off my shoulders. I dropped Leo off at his school, with a bright smile watching him run inside to his friends. I had taken the day off from work to handle a few final personal errands, and I decided to treat myself to a quiet, luxurious breakfast. I walked into an upscale Parisian-style cafe, located just a few blocks from my downtown office. The smell of freshly ground espresso beans and warm butter croissants filled the air, offering a stark, beautiful contrast to the absolute chaos I had orchestrated the night before. I found a secluded corner table near the large front window, ordered a caramel macchiato and a pastry, and opened my laptop to check the morning headlines. The local news cycle was completely dominated by the massive federal raid on Sterling real estate enterprises. Every major news outlet in Atlanta was running endless commentary on the seized assets, the frozen bank accounts, and the total political destruction of Jamal. It was a flawless victory. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of my warm coffee, savoring the sweet taste of my new freedom. But my quiet morning was abruptly interrupted. A dark shadow fell across my small marble table, completely blocking the warm morning sunlight. I slowly looked up from my screen. Standing right in front of me, looking absolutely frantic and deeply exhausted, was Jasmine. She looked nothing like the polished, glowing, perfectly styled social media influencer I was used to seeing. The innocent, fragile, pregnant girl routine she had played so perfectly at the courthouse and the steakhouse was completely gone. She was wearing a beige trench coat pulled tightly around her waist, a pair of oversized black sunglasses hiding her eyes, and her usually flawless hair was pulled back into a messy, uneven ponytail. She did not wait for an invitation. She grabbed the metal chair opposite mine, dragged it aggressively across the tiled floor, and sat down hard. She leaned forward, slamming both of her manicured hands onto the marble table. Her face was tense, her jaw clenched tight. "Listen to me very carefully, Camille." Jasmine hissed, her voice completely devoid of the sweet, high-pitched giggles she usually weaponized. "I do not have time for games today. The federal agents raided the luxury condo Darius leased for me at 5 o'clock this morning. They took my jewelry. They took my designer bags. They completely froze the joint checking account Darius set up for my living expenses. I have absolutely zero access to any cash, and my credit cards are being declined everywhere." I took another calm sip of my coffee, placing the cup gently back onto the saucer. "That sounds incredibly stressful, Jasmine. But I fail to see how your frozen bank accounts have anything to do with my morning coffee. You should probably call the public defender assigned to Darius. I am sure they can offer you some wonderful legal advice on how to navigate the federal forfeiture process." Jasmine slammed her hand against the table again, causing my coffee cup to rattle. "Drop the act, Camille," she snapped, leaning in so close I could smell the stale alcohol on her breath. "I know all about the emergency cash." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely amused. "The emergency cash. Do not play stupid with me," Jasmine growled, her eyes darting nervously around the quiet cafe to make sure no one was listening to us. "Darius told me he always kept a massive hidden emergency fund in a private offshore account, just in case the real estate market ever crashed. He said it was completely untraceable. He said you were the one who set it up and managed it for him. I need that account number, Camille. I need the routing information and the access codes right now." I stared at her, marveling at the sheer, unadulterated audacity. She had actively helped destroy my marriage, flaunted her affair in my face, mocked me in public, and now she was sitting across from me demanding I fund her escape plan. "And why on earth would I ever give you a single dime?" I asked smoothly, resting my hands neatly on my lap. "Because you owe him." Jasmine spat viciously, a cruel, ugly sneer twisting her features. She finally dropped the last remaining shred of her fake innocence, revealing the toxic, venomous core beneath her pretty face. "You owe him for keeping you around as long as he did. Do you honestly think Darius ever actually loved you? He told me everything, Camille. He told me how completely miserable he was in your marriage. He said you were boring, rigid, and totally devoid of passion. He said coming home to you felt like walking into a corporate boardroom." She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms and smiling a dark, vindictive smile. "He only stayed with you because you were useful. You were nothing but an unpaid accountant who happened to wash his clothes and raise his child. He was completely repulsed by you. He loved me. He wanted to build a real family with me. I gave him the excitement and the passion you never could. So you are going to give me the access codes to that hidden cash stash right now, so I can leave this city and take care of his baby, or I swear I will go to the press and tell them you were the mastermind behind the entire fraud scheme. I will tell them you framed him." She sat there breathing heavily, looking incredibly proud of her vicious little monologue. She truly believed her cruel words would break me. She thought reminding me of my ex-husband's betrayal would somehow shatter my confidence and force me to submit to her demands. I did not flinch. I did not cry. I did not even raise my voice. I simply let her finish her pathetic rant, maintaining steady, unwavering eye contact. I reached into my leather tote bag sitting on the empty chair beside me. I pulled out a crisp white envelope and placed it flat on the marble table. I slowly slid it across the smooth surface until it rested directly in front of Jasmine. Jasmine frowned, looking down at the unmarked envelope. "What is this?" she demanded. "Is this the account information?" "No, Jasmine." I said, my voice eerily calm and dripping with absolute certainty. "That is not an account number. There is no hidden emergency cash stash. Darius lied to you about that to make himself look like a brilliant, prepared billionaire. The only untraceable money he ever had was the money I tracked directly into the hands of the federal government. You are completely broke. You have no escape fund. But what is inside that envelope is actually much more valuable to your immediate future. Jasmine hesitated, her eyes narrowing in deep suspicion. She slowly reached out with trembling fingers, picked up the envelope, and tore open the flap. She pulled out a small stack of official-looking medical documents printed on the heavy watermarked paper of a highly exclusive Atlanta urology clinic. She stared at the top page, her brow furrowing in confusion. These are medical records. Why are you giving me Darius's medical records? I took a final sip of my macchiato, enjoying the rich, sweet flavor. Read the second paragraph on the first page, Jasmine. Read it very carefully. Jasmine's eyes darted down the page. The cafe around us was filled with the soft hum of conversation and the clinking of silverware. But at our table, the silence was deafening. I watched closely as her eyes scanned the medical jargon. I watched the exact moment her brain processed the information. The arrogant, entitled sneer completely vanished from her face. Her jaw went slack. The blood drained entirely from her cheeks, leaving her face a terrifying, ghostly shade of white. Her hands began to shake so violently that the heavy medical papers rattled loudly against each other. No, Jasmine whispered, her voice completely hollow and breathless. No, this cannot be real. This is a fake. You forged this. It is completely real, I assured her, my voice hard and entirely merciless. It is an official certified medical record from 3 years ago. You see, Jasmine, you were so busy gloating about how much Darius loved you and how desperate he was to start a new family with you that you completely missed a very important detail about his medical history. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table, closing the physical distance between us. Darius had a vasectomy 3 years ago. Jasmine, I stated clearly, letting every single word strike her like a physical blow. He had the procedure done right after Leo turned 4. He told me he absolutely did not want any more children because it would interfere with his luxury lifestyle. The clinic confirmed the procedure was completely successful and irreversible without highly invasive complex surgery, a surgery he absolutely never had. Jasmine stared at me, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated panic. She pressed a trembling hand against her pregnant stomach, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "You are lying," she gasped out, shaking her head frantically. "He is the father. He promised me he was the father. He is not the father of your baby, Jasmine," I said coldly. "And honestly, I do not care who the real father is. Maybe it is the personal trainer you see on Tuesday mornings. Maybe it is the club promoter you text late at night. That is entirely your problem. But it definitely is not my ex-husband." Jasmine dropped the papers onto the table as if they were literally on fire. She covered her mouth with both hands, tears of pure terror spilling over her eyelashes. She had built her entire grift, her entire luxury lifestyle on the absolute certainty that she had trapped a wealthy man with a pregnancy. And now that foundational lie had been completely and violently exposed. "You cannot show this to him," Jasmine begged, her voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched sob. "Please, Camille. If Darius finds out the baby is not his, he will completely cut me off. He will never speak to me again. He will not pay for my lawyers. I will have absolutely nothing." I picked up my purse and stood up from the table, looking down at the utterly ruined, sobbing woman who had tried to destroy my life just 24 hours earlier. "I am afraid you are a little too late for that request, Jasmine," I said, offering her one final, chilling smile, "because I already mailed a certified copy of those exact medical records to the Federal Detention Center this morning. Darius is probably sitting in his jail cell opening the envelope right this very second. Good luck with your public defender." I turned my back on her, walked calmly out of the beautiful Parisian cafe, and stepped into the bright, warm Atlanta sunlight, leaving the mistress trapped entirely in the inescapable prison of her own deceit. I drove straight from the Parisian cafe to the towering glass and steel structure of the Richard B. Russell Federal Building in downtown Atlanta. The imposing architecture felt truly fitting for the absolute finality of the day. I parked my modest car in the secure underground lot, clipped my temporary federal visitor badge to the lapel of my gray blazer, and took the private elevator up to the 16th floor. Special Agent Miller was waiting for me near the heavy steel doors of the maximum security holding area. He looked deeply satisfied holding a manila folder completely stuffed with financial printouts. He handed me the folder with a sharp nod of profound respect. The federal agents had spent the entire night breaking down Darius, but he was stubbornly refusing to sign a full written confession. He kept loudly demanding to speak to his wife, unaware that I was the exact reason he was sitting in a windowless room wearing heavy handcuffs. Agent Miller opened the heavy steel door, and I stepped inside the freezing cold interrogation room. Darius was seated at a bolted metal table in the center of the stark white room. He looked absolutely unrecognizable. The arrogant real estate mogul who had strutted through the courthouse 24 hours ago was completely gone. He was still wearing the same custom Italian suit from the steakhouse, but it was now deeply wrinkled, stained with dried champagne and reeking of stale sweat and sheer panic. His silk tie was missing. His styled hair was a chaotic, greasy mess. His hands were cuffed securely to a heavy metal ring anchored to the table. When he heard the heavy door click shut, his head snapped up. His bloodshot eyes widened in absolute shock as he realized it was me walking into the room instead of a ruthless federal prosecutor. For a split second, a flicker of his old aggressive arrogance flashed across his ruined face, but it was quickly swallowed by pure, unfiltered desperation. "Camille," he gasped, his voice raspy and entirely broken. "Oh my God, Camille, you actually came!" He leaned forward as far as the heavy metal chain would physically allow him, his eyes brimming with dramatic, manufactured tears. "I knew you would not abandon me. I knew you would finally come to your senses. You have to tell these federal agents they are making a massive mistake. You have to tell them I had absolutely nothing to do with the Cayman accounts." I pulled out the metal chair across from him and sat down slowly. I placed the thick manila folder onto the table, resting my hands neatly on top of it. I did not say a single word. I just let him talk, watching him dig his own grave with every pathetic, manipulative syllable. "Please, Camille," Darius begged, his voice cracking with fake emotion. He tried to reach out to hold my hand, but the handcuffs violently jerked his wrists back, the metal clinking loudly. "I am so incredibly sorry for how I acted at the courthouse yesterday. I was just angry about the divorce. I was acting like a total idiot to protect my pride. But you know my heart. You know I am a fundamentally good man. Everything I did, every single business deal I made, I did it entirely for you and Leo. I wanted to build an incredible empire for our son. I wanted to make sure you never had to worry about money ever again. I took those massive financial risks because I loved my family so much it completely blinded me to the law. I was just trying to provide an amazing life for you." He was actually crying now. Real tears were spilling down his cheeks, dropping onto the cold stainless steel table. He was putting on the performance of an absolute lifetime, desperately trying to manipulate my emotions the exact same way he had manipulated my trust for 11 years. He truly believed I was still the quiet, compliant woman who would instantly swoop in and clean up his massive messes just to keep the family unit perfectly intact. "You have to help me!" Darius sobbed, his chest heaving aggressively under his ruined suit. "They are talking about 20 years in a federal penitentiary, Camille. 20 years. I will never see Leo grow up. I will completely die in a concrete box. You cannot let them do this to the father of your child. You know the corporate ledgers better than anyone else in the entire world. You can easily find a legal loophole. You can testify that my signature was forged by Jamal. We can blame the entire illegal operation on Jamal. He is a corrupt politician anyway. Nobody will even question it. Just get me out of here and I swear I will give you anything you want. I will completely leave Jasmine. I will come back home today. We can be a real family again." I let his pathetic, hollow promises hang in the freezing air of the interrogation room for a long, agonizing moment. I looked at his tear-stained face, feeling absolutely nothing but profound clinical disgust. "You did it all for me," I repeated, my voice echoing coldly off the bare concrete walls. You built this massive fraudulent empire to make sure I never had to worry about money. That is a truly beautiful story, Darius. It really is an incredible piece of fiction. I slowly opened the thick manila folder sitting in front of me. I pulled out a heavy stack of highlighted bank statements and spread them out across the table so he could see the numbers clearly. Let us take a very close look at exactly how you provided for me, I said, tapping my manicured finger against the top document. This is the master ledger for our joint household checking account. Do you remember the massive argument we had 6 months ago when I asked you for an extra $200 to buy Leo a new winter coat and some heavy boots? You screamed at me for 20 solid minutes. You told me the real estate market was incredibly tight. The company was struggling with cash flow, and I needed to stop being so financially irresponsible. You put me on a strict grocery budget of exactly $400 a month. You made me clip coupons, Darius. You made me shop at discount stores while you were supposedly building a multi-million-dollar empire for our family. Darius swallowed hard, his eyes darting quickly away from the highlighted bank statements. Camille, the liquid assets were completely tied up in the commercial developments. I did not have the cash on hand. I pulled out a second stack of papers and slapped them down hard onto the metal table. The sharp sound made him violently flinch. That is a fascinating excuse, I replied mercilessly. Because on the exact same day you screamed at me for wanting to buy our son a winter coat, you authorized a wire transfer of $14,000 from your hidden offshore account. And where did that money go, Darius? It did not go into a college fund for Leo. It did not go into a retirement account for us. It went directly to a luxury car dealership in Buckhead to pay the cash down payment on a brand new Range Rover for Jasmine. Darius froze entirely. His mouth opened, but absolutely no sound came out. I pulled out another document, sliding it right under his nose. 2 weeks later, you forced me to cancel my professional accounting certification courses to save $50 a month. The very next morning, you signed a commercial lease agreement for a luxury high-rise condo in Midtown, paying $40,000 upfront in cash, so Jasmine could have a gorgeous city view. You spent $12,000 on designer bags for her birthday. You spent $8,000 sending your sister Tasha on a private spa vacation to Mexico. You funneled hundreds of thousands of stolen taxpayer dollars into your mother's fake charity so she could throw lavish catered parties at her exclusive country club. I leaned forward, my eyes locking intensely onto his terrified face. Do not you ever sit there and tell me you broke the federal law to provide for me. You kept me completely starved for resources, so I would be too exhausted and too dependent to ever question your absolute authority. You used me as free labor to manage your disastrous financial books, while you spent a massive fortune funding a luxurious fantasy life for your mistress, your corrupt brother-in-law, your arrogant sister, and your vicious mother. You did not build an empire for your son. You built a monument to your own colossal ego, and you expected me to quietly sweep the floors forever. Darius looked completely destroyed. The fake tears had entirely stopped falling. The desperate manipulative husband routine was utterly dead, replaced by the terrifying realization that I knew absolutely every single detail of his ultimate betrayal. He looked down at the financial documents scattered across the table, his chest rising and falling, in rapid, incredibly shallow breaths. He was entirely trapped, backed into a corner with absolutely zero leverage. Camille, please, Darius, whispered his voice, shaking uncontrollably. His eyes darted toward the large two-way mirror covering the right wall of the interrogation room. He knew the federal agents were standing right behind that glass, listening to every single word. I cannot go to trial. If they put all of this evidence in front of a federal jury, they will completely bury me. They will give me the maximum sentence. I will never survive a maximum security prison. He leaned his head down against the cold metal table, his shoulders shaking with genuine absolute terror. I need to make a plea deal, he sobbed, his voice muffled by the thick steel. I will plead guilty to the wire fraud. I will give up Jamal entirely. I will tell them exactly how Jamal bypassed the city zoning laws. I will give them the names of every single corrupt official on the city council. Just please, Camille. You have the ear of the lead investigators. They clearly trust you. You brought them the initial evidence. You have to go out there and talk to the federal prosecutor for me. He slowly raised his head, looking at me with the pathetic, hollow eyes of a completely broken man. Tell them I am fully cooperating. Tell them I will sign whatever they want me to sign if they just guarantee me a reduced sentence in a minimum security facility. You are the whistleblower. They will listen to you. Put in a good word for me. I am begging you on my hands and knees. Save my life, Camille. I sat perfectly still, letting his desperate, pathetic pleas wash over me. For 11 long years, I had listened to this exact man demand my complete obedience. I had watched him flaunt his unearned wealth while treating me like an expendable asset. I had endured the relentless cruelty of his family because he flatly refused to protect me. And now he was actively begging me to save him from the exact fire he had intentionally started. I slowly gathered the highlighted bank statements, tapping them neatly against the metal table to align the edges. I placed them carefully back into the thick manila folder and closed the heavy cover. I stood up from the metal chair, looking down at him with an expression of absolute terrifying authority. I leaned in very close, resting both of my hands firmly on the edge of the steel table. The room was dead silent, save for the frantic, ragged sound of his breathing. I am not just the whistleblower, Darius. I whispered, my voice cutting through the freezing air like a freshly sharpened blade. I am the lead forensic investigator assigned to your prosecution by the federal government. Darius recoiled violently, his chair scraping loudly against the concrete floor, as if he had just been physically burned. The sheer magnitude of his absolute defeat finally settled into his eyes. He realized I was not just a witness handing over documents. I was the architect of his entire federal prosecution. I did not wait for him to beg anymore. I simply picked up my manila folder, turned on my heel, and walked out of the interrogation room, leaving him completely alone with his shattered reality. 3 weeks later, the spectacular implosion of the Sterling family reached its absolute peak inside a sterile, heavily guarded deposition room at the federal courthouse. The government had gathered all the key players to officially record statements before the grand jury indictments. I sat quietly in the corner next to Special Agent Miller and the lead federal prosecutor, watching the toxic family completely devour each other. The room was suffocatingly tense. Darius sat at the far end of the long conference table wearing a bright orange prison jumpsuit, his wrists shackled to a belly chain. He looked completely hollowed out, the luxury real estate mogul completely erased by 21 days in federal lockup. Directly across from him sat Jamal, sweating profusely through his cheap off-the-rack suit. Jamal had brought his own ruthless defense attorney, having aggressively scrambled to secure a plea deal the absolute second he realized the FBI had my audio recordings. Tasha sat a few chairs down, refusing to even look at her husband. Beatrice was seated near the door, clutching her purse, her face pinched in a mask of bitter, terrified denial. Jamal cleared his throat, his hands shaking as he poured himself a glass of water. He did not look at Darius. He looked directly at the federal prosecutor. I am prepared to fully testify to the exact mechanics of the municipal grant fraud, Jamal stated, his voice completely devoid of any familial loyalty. Darius orchestrated the entire scheme. He approached me 3 years ago, begging me to bypass the environmental reviews for the Southside project. He explicitly told me he would funnel 20% of the stolen city funds directly into my offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. I was completely manipulated by him. He used my political position to mask his criminal enterprise. Liar, Darius roared, straining violently against his heavy metal chains. The 2 federal marshals standing behind him immediately stepped forward, placing their hands forcefully on his shoulders. You came to me, Jamal. You said your re-election campaign was entirely broke. You said you needed cash to pay off your political opponents. You drafted the fake permits yourself. Jamal sneered, completely dropping the terrified politician act. You are going down, Darius, and I am not letting you drag me to the bottom of the ocean with you. I have already provided the government with every single text message you ever sent me regarding the fake vendor payments. I gave them the routing numbers for the shell companies. I am giving them everything they need to lock you away for 20 years. Beatrice gasped loudly, slamming her hand onto the conference table. Jamal, how dare you! She shrieked, her voice echoing aggressively in the small room. He is your brother. He gave you everything you have. You are a disgusting, treacherous snake. I completely disown you. You are absolutely dead to this family. You will never set foot in my house again. You do not have a house, Beatrice. Jamal shot back viciously, his face twisting with pure hatred. The bank took your precious Buckhead mansion 3 weeks ago. You are currently living in a cheap rental apartment in Decatur. Do not try to act like you are still the Queen of Atlanta. Your entire legacy is a massive joke. Tasha suddenly stood up, her chair violently tipping over backward. She reached into her designer handbag, pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, and threw them aggressively across the table directly at Jamal. The papers hit his chest and scattered across the polished wood. Those are divorce papers, Jamal. Tasha screamed, her face red with absolute fury. I filed them this morning. You are a complete failure of a man. You promised me a life of luxury and political power, and instead, you got us investigated by the federal government. You let my fashion boutique get raided. My credit cards are frozen. My friends are laughing at me, and I am facing potential tax evasion charges because you were too stupid to hide the money properly. I am absolutely done with you. Jamal laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that completely lacked humor. Your fashion boutique, he mocked loudly. Your boutique was a pathetic, empty vanity project. You never had a single real customer, Tasha. You were completely delusional. You spent $84,000 on secret credit cards just to buy clothes for yourself because you were desperately trying to look wealthy. You are nothing but a spoiled, arrogant child who married me because you thought my political connections would make you famous. You ruined my career with your endless demands for cash. Darius laughed from across the table, a dark, unhinged sound. She has always been a parasite, Jamal. Did you really think she loved you? She only married you because the first 3 rich men she dated realized she was completely insane and dumped her. She has been secretly siphoning money out of your joint accounts for years to pay for her cosmetic surgeries. Shut up, Darius! Tasha shrieked, lunging across the table toward her brother. You are the one who ruined everything. You were so incredibly jealous of Jamal's political power that you intentionally involved him in your illegal schemes just to prove you could control him. You always hated the fact that Mother loved him more than she loved you. The deposition room completely devolved into a chaotic, vicious war zone. They abandoned all legal strategy and began ruthlessly tearing each other to shreds, exposing decades of deeply buried family secrets, intense jealousy, and absolute backstabbing. Tasha revealed that Darius had intentionally sabotaged Jamal's first city council, run by leaking false rumors to the press just to keep Jamal reliant on his money. Jamal screamed that Beatrice had secretly hated Tasha's previous fiancés because they were not wealthy enough to elevate her social status at the country club. Darius yelled that Beatrice had known about the offshore accounts the entire time and had actively encouraged him to steal more city funds so she could buy a summer house in Martha's Vineyard. They were like rats trapped on a rapidly sinking ship, violently attacking each other in a desperate, pathetic attempt to survive. They completely forgot about the federal agents sitting in the room. They forgot about the prosecutor. They forgot about me. They were entirely consumed by their own toxic, venomous hatred for one another. I sat back in my chair watching the mighty Sterling family absolutely destroy whatever tiny shreds of dignity they had left. This was the exact culture they had cultivated for decades. A culture built entirely on greed, lies, and extreme selfishness. The moment the money disappeared, their familial loyalty evaporated instantly. Enough! The lead federal prosecutor suddenly barked, his powerful voice cutting right through the chaotic screaming. The room fell instantly silent. Tasha slowly picked up her overturned chair and sat down, breathing heavily. Jamal wiped the sweat from his forehead, looking completely exhausted. Darius slumped back into his chair, the heavy chains rattling against the wood. Beatrice sat frozen, her eyes darting nervously around the room. The prosecutor stood up, picking up a single heavily redacted document from his file. We have enough recorded testimony today to secure multiple federal indictments for conspiracy wire fraud and political corruption. But there is one final piece of evidence we need to place on the official record today. He looked directly at Beatrice, his expression entirely grim and completely merciless. Mrs. Sterling, the government has thoroughly audited your personal finances. We understand that your home was seized as collateral for the fraudulent commercial loans. However, we also reviewed the status of the private retirement fund your late husband left for you, a fund that was originally valued at roughly $1.2 million. Beatrice sat up perfectly straight, suddenly looking incredibly defensive. My retirement fund is completely separate from the real estate company. It is held in a secure trust. You have absolutely no legal right to freeze my personal survival money. I need that money to live. The prosecutor shook his head slowly. We did not freeze your retirement fund, Mrs. Sterling. Beatrice frowned, total confusion washing over her wrinkled face. Then why are you bringing it up in this deposition? Where is my money? The prosecutor turned his gaze slowly toward Darius. Darius had completely stopped breathing. His eyes were wide with sheer, absolute terror. He was violently shaking his head back and forth, silently begging the prosecutor not to say the next words. Your money is entirely gone, Mrs. Sterling. The prosecutor stated clearly, the words hitting the silent room like a physical blow. The account balance is exactly zero. Beatrice gasped, clapping her hand over her heart. That is absolutely impossible. I have not touched that money in 10 years. Darius manages that trust account for me. He promised me it was growing in a high-yield investment portfolio. He lied to you, the prosecutor said coldly. 2 years ago, Darius forged your signature on a complete withdrawal authorization. He completely drained the $1.2 million from your secure retirement trust. He did not invest it. He used every single penny of your survival money to purchase the luxury high-rise condo in Midtown Atlanta, the exact same condo where his 24-year-old mistress Jasmine is currently residing. The absolute silence in the deposition room was deafening. It was a thick, heavy, suffocating silence that completely paralyzed everyone at the table. Tasha covered her mouth, staring at her brother in absolute, unadulterated horror. Jamal looked at Darius as if he were looking at a complete stranger, completely repulsed by the sheer depth of the betrayal. Beatrice did not scream. She did not yell. She slowly turned her head to look at Darius, her golden child, the son she had defended, protected, and worshipped for his entire life. The son she had treated like a king, while treating me like absolute garbage. The son who had secretly stolen her entire life savings to buy a luxury apartment for a pregnant influencer. Darius could not even look her in the eye. He stared down at his handcuffed wrists, tears of pure shame falling onto the table. Beatrice opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her eyes rolled completely back into her head. Her body went entirely limp and she violently collapsed sideways out of her chair, hitting the hard floor of the deposition room in a dead faint. The heavy thud of Beatrice hitting the floor was the final punctuation mark on the Sterling family legacy. Medical personnel were immediately called into the deposition room, but the damage was already permanently done. When they loaded the unconscious matriarch onto a stretcher, nobody in her family even stood up to accompany her to the hospital. Tasha was too busy violently sobbing over her impending divorce and her complete financial ruin. Jamal was staring blankly at the wall, completely paralyzed by the realization of his destroyed political career. And Darius simply sat at the conference table, his head buried in his handcuffed hands, entirely consumed by his own catastrophic failure. That was the last time I ever saw them in the same room together as a family. They had completely devoured each other, 7 agonizing months later, the bitter winter wind whipped against the heavy concrete pillars of the federal courthouse. It was officially Judgment Day. The media circus surrounding the trial had been absolutely relentless. The spectacular downfall of a prominent city councilman and a wealthy real estate mogul had dominated the Atlanta news cycle for over half a year. But today, the television cameras were not allowed inside the courtroom. Today was reserved strictly for the cold, unyielding hammer of federal justice. I walked through the heavy oak doors of the courtroom wearing a sharp, tailored black suit. I took my seat in the front row, sitting directly behind the federal prosecution team. I was not there as a grieving ex-wife. I was there as the lead forensic investigator who had successfully guided the government through a massive maze of offshore accounts, fake vendors, and stolen municipal grants. The courtroom was packed to absolute capacity, but it was dead silent. Tasha sat a few rows behind me, completely unrecognizable. The designer clothes and expensive jewelry were entirely gone, replaced by a cheap, oversized sweater and unwashed, messy hair. She looked entirely broken, having narrowly avoided her own prison sentence by aggressively testifying against her brother and her husband. Jasmine was nowhere to be seen. She had vanished from Atlanta entirely the moment the federal accounts were frozen, leaving Darius with absolutely nothing but a hollow memory of her fake affection. Beatrice was also absent. After suffering a severe panic attack during the deposition, she had been moved into a state-funded assisted living facility, completely stripped of her wealth, her mansion, and her powerful country club friends. She was living the exact life she had ruthlessly mocked my own parents for enduring. A heavy wooden door near the judge's bench swung open. A pair of armed federal marshals escorted Jamal into the room. He was wearing the standard bright orange jumpsuit of a federal inmate. His charismatic politician's smile was entirely gone, replaced by a gaunt, hollow expression. He shuffled to the defense table, the heavy chains around his ankles clinking loudly against the polished floor. A moment later, the door opened again and Darius was led into the courtroom. He looked absolutely terrible. The sleek, arrogant billionaire who had popped champagne at the steakhouse was completely dead. His hair was thinning and entirely graying at the temples. His posture was severely hunched, as if the physical weight of his crimes was actively crushing his spine. He slowly took his seat next to his public defender, refusing to make eye contact with anyone in the gallery. He did not look for his sister. He did not look for me. He just stared blankly at the heavy wooden desk in front of him. "All rise," the bailiff announced loudly. The Honorable Judge Marcus Harrison walked into the courtroom, his black robes billowing behind him. He was known throughout the district as an incredibly strict, entirely merciless judge who absolutely despised white-collar criminals and corrupt politicians. He took his seat at the high bench, adjusted his reading glasses, and looked down at the two broken men sitting before him. The tension in the room was completely suffocating. "We are here today for the final sentencing in the matter of the United States versus Darius Sterling and Jamal Hayes." Judge Harrison began, his deep voice echoing powerfully off the high ceilings. "I have spent the last 3 weeks reviewing the sheer volume of evidence presented by the federal prosecution team. I have read the forensic accounting reports. I have listened to the audio recordings of your private conversations. I have reviewed the forged zoning permits and the fake vendor invoices." Judge Harrison paused, removing his glasses and staring directly at Jamal. "Mr. Hayes, you were elected by the citizens of this city to protect their interests. You were trusted to govern with absolute integrity. Instead, you used your political office as a personal piggy bank. You actively bypassed environmental reviews, approved fraudulent municipal grants, and funneled taxpayer money into offshore accounts to fund a lifestyle of grotesque luxury. You completely violated the public trust. The fact that you fully cooperated with the government only after you were caught on a federal wiretap does not erase the severe damage you have done to this city." Jamal closed his eyes tightly, a single tear escaping and rolling down his hollow cheek. It is the judgment of this court that you, Jamal Hayes, be sentenced to 8 years in a federal penitentiary, followed by 5 years of supervised release and full financial restitution to the city of Atlanta, the judge declared, striking his heavy wooden gavel. Jamal let out a pathetic, breathless whimper. Tasha began sobbing quietly in the gallery behind me, mourning the final, absolute destruction of her high society dreams. The federal marshals immediately stepped forward, placing their hands firmly on Jamal's shoulders and preparing to remove him from the room. But Judge Harrison was not finished. He turned his piercing gaze toward Darius. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. Mr. Sterling, the judge, said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. You were the primary architect of this massive criminal enterprise. You manipulated the system, you manipulated the city treasury, and you ruthlessly manipulated your own family. But what stands out to me the most in this entire federal case is the staggering, almost incomprehensible level of your personal arrogance. Darius kept his head down, staring at his handcuffed wrists resting on the table. The judge leaned forward over the high bench, his expression entirely devoid of mercy. The court reviewed your final divorce settlement, Mr. Sterling. The prosecution provided the complete transcripts from your family court hearings. I read exactly how you demanded sole undivided ownership of Sterling Real Estate Enterprises. I read how you loudly bragged about keeping the Buckhead mansion, the luxury vehicles, and the investment portfolios. You actively maneuvered the legal system to leave your ex-wife completely destitute. You wanted to punish her. You wanted to humiliate her. You wanted to prove that you held all the power in the relationship. The judge shook his head slowly, his voice laced with profound disgust. If you had just been fair, Mr. Sterling, if you had just split the assets evenly as the law originally intended, if you had allowed your ex-wife to maintain her 50% stake in the corporate holding company, you would have severely complicated this entire federal prosecution. The government would have been forced to untangle a massive web of shared liability. You might have been able to leverage her professional accounting credentials to secure a significantly lighter sentence. You might have even avoided the maximum federal penalties altogether. Darius suddenly looked up, his eyes widening in pure shock. The brutal, undeniable truth of the judge's words slammed into him like a freight train. But your own greed blinded you entirely. Judge Harrison continued flawlessly, his voice rising in volume and intensity. You were so incredibly desperate to leave her with absolutely nothing that you legally absorbed 100% of the fraudulent debt. You legally indemnified the government's star witness. You gleefully signed a binding legal document that took sole responsibility for millions of dollars in stolen municipal funds. Your own vicious arrogance sealed your fate. You built a highly complex trap to destroy your ex-wife, and you eagerly locked yourself right inside it. I sat perfectly still, my face a mask of absolute calm. The judge had just validated every single move I had made over the last year. He had laid Darius's colossal stupidity bare for the entire world to see. For the crimes of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and the theft of federal and municipal funds, Judge Harrison announced, his voice ringing with absolute finality. I sentence you, Darius Sterling, to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. You will serve this sentence without the possibility of early parole. All remaining assets are officially ordered to be seized and liquidated. You will pay full restitution to the victims of your fraud, including the retirement trust of your own mother, which you so callously destroyed. The heavy wooden gavel struck the sounding block with a violent, deafening crack. Darius let out a loud, agonizing scream of pure terror. He tried to stand up, but the heavy chains pulled him aggressively back down. No, he yelled frantically, struggling against the 2 federal marshals, who immediately grabbed his arms. Please, Your Honor, 15 years is a death sentence. I cannot survive 15 years in a maximum security prison. You have to reconsider, please. Judge Harrison completely ignored the pathetic outburst. He calmly gathered his files, stood up from the bench, and walked out of the courtroom. The sentencing was entirely final. There were absolutely no more legal maneuvers. There were no more bribes. There was no more stolen money to hide behind. The empire was officially dead and buried. The federal marshals yanked Darius forcefully to his feet. They began to drag him away from the defense table, leading him toward the heavy steel holding door at the side of the courtroom. The clinking of his heavy chains echoed sharply across the silent room. Jamal was already being led through the doorway, his head hung low in complete defeat. Just as the marshals pulled Darius toward the exit, he aggressively dug his heels into the polished floor, forcing them to pause for a brief second. He twisted his body around his desperate, terrified eyes, frantically scanning the crowded gallery. He was looking for me. His eyes finally locked onto mine. He looked absolutely pathetic. His face was soaked in tears, his mouth trembling uncontrollably. In that fleeting, agonizing moment, I saw the true realization hit him. He realized that the quiet, compliant woman he had constantly abused and underestimated was the absolute master of his total destruction. He realized that the luxury life he had stolen was entirely gone, replaced by a tiny concrete cell where he would spend the next 15 years of his miserable existence. He looked at me silently, begging for a single ounce of sympathy. He wanted me to cry. He wanted me to show some sign of lingering emotional attachment. He desperately wanted to know that he still mattered to me in some twisted way. I did not smile. I did not frown. I did not offer him a single shred of emotion. I looked at his completely broken face with the cold, clinical detachment of a stranger observing a fascinating insect. I calmly picked up my leather purse from the wooden bench. I turned my back on him entirely, completely erasing his existence from my line of sight. Camille Darius screamed, his voice cracking violently as the marshals violently shoved him through the heavy steel door. I did not look back. The heavy metal door slammed shut with a loud, echoing boom, cutting off his desperate scream completely. I walked gracefully down the center aisle of the courtroom, the rhythmic sound of my heels tapping against the floor sounding like a quiet, beautiful victory march. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the bright, cold Atlanta morning entirely free. 6 months later, the bitter cold of that winter morning had completely melted away, replaced by the bright, warm sunshine of an Atlanta summer. I stood quietly holding a steaming cup of artisan coffee, looking out through the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my brand-new corner office. The view was absolutely spectacular. I could see the entire downtown skyline stretching out beneath me, a sprawling network of steel and glass that I now surveyed from the very top. I was no longer the quiet, subservient wife, hiding in the dark basement of a suburban mansion, frantically trying to balance the fraudulent books of a corrupt real estate firm. I was officially a senior partner at one of the most prestigious forensic accounting firms in the entire state of Georgia. My name was permanently etched into the heavy frosted glass of the double doors leading into my suite. The federal takedown of the Sterling family empire had not just been a personal victory for me. It had been the most highly publicized financial scandal in the history of Fulton County. Because of the meticulous, undeniable evidence I had provided to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the United States government was able to successfully recover over $30 million in stolen municipal grants, unpaid corporate taxes, and laundered campaign funds. The operation was a massive, flawless success for the Department of Justice, and the federal government is incredibly generous to the people who help them recover their stolen money. I walked slowly back to my massive mahogany desk and looked down at the officially sealed document sitting right in the center of my leather blotter. It was a formal notification from the United States Treasury. As the primary whistleblower and the lead forensic investigator who had cracked the entire case wide open, I was legally entitled to a percentage of the recovered funds. The government had officially awarded me a whistleblower bounty of exactly $4.2 million. The money had cleared my secure personal bank account that very morning. I had walked out of that divorce courtroom with absolutely nothing but my son and a shredded $5,000 check. 6 months later, I was a multimillionaire, entirely self-made, completely independent, and untouchable. That weekend, The warm summer air carried the rich, comforting smell of roasted garlic and smoked brisket across the sprawling green lawns of my brand new home. I had not bought a flashy, obnoxious mansion in Buckhead to show off to a bunch of shallow country club socialites. Instead, I purchased a beautiful historic estate on 3 acres of private wooded land in the quiet suburbs. It had a massive wrap around porch giant oak trees shading the driveway and a huge backyard where my son could run completely free. It was Sunday evening and I was hosting a dinner party. But this dinner was absolutely nothing like the toxic, suffocating Sunday dinners I had been forced to endure with Beatrice and Tasha. There was no fake, arrogant bragging. There were no vicious, passive-aggressive insults thinly veiled as jokes. There was no desperate need to pretend we were better than anyone else. I stood on the back patio smiling genuinely as I watched the scene unfold in my backyard. Leo was running across the thick green grass, laughing hysterically as he played an intense game of tag with the children of my closest friends. The adults were gathered around the large, rustic wooden table on the patio, passing heavy bowls of homemade macaroni and cheese, fresh collard greens, and thick slices of perfectly smoked meat. Special Agent Miller, who had become a genuinely good friend after the trial, was sitting at the end of the table laughing loudly at a joke my new business partner had just told. The air was completely filled with real, authentic joy. It was a group of people who actually valued me for my mind, my strength, and my character, not for what I could secretly do to cover up their flaws. I looked at my son, his face glowing with pure happiness. He was completely safe. The dark, poisonous cycle of the Sterling family's narcissistic abuse had been entirely broken. He would never be taught to measure his worth by the designer clothes on his back or the price tag of his car. He would be raised with integrity, honesty, and genuine love. I had completely successfully shielded him from a family that would have eventually destroyed his soul. I took a slow sip of my red wine, feeling the cool evening breeze brush against my face. I stepped away from the lively noise of the dinner table, walking a few paces out onto the soft grass. I looked back at my beautiful home, the warm golden light spilling out from the large windows, illuminating the people who truly mattered to me. I thought about Darius, sitting in his tiny cold concrete cell. I thought about Beatrice living in her cramped state-funded apartment. I thought about Tasha desperately trying to avoid bankruptcy and Jamal watching his political career turn to dust. They had brought it all upon themselves. They thought stripping me of my title as a wife would leave me with nothing. They thought I was just a quiet, uneducated peasant who was lucky to be allowed in their presence. They thought I would crumble without their money, their status, and their powerful name. They completely forgot that I was the one holding the entire empire together from the very beginning. I was the foundation they built their fake castle on, and the moment they tried to crush me, I simply stepped away and watched them fall. When you force a Black woman to build from scratch, don't be surprised when she builds a fortress that locks you out. The story of the Sterling family's spectacular downfall is a masterclass in the destructive power of unchecked arrogance and greed. It vividly illustrates how a family culture built entirely on manipulation, deceit, and the obsessive pursuit of status is fundamentally fragile. When wealth is acquired through fraud, rather than honest labor, the foundation is inherently rotten. The moment pressure is applied, the facade crumbles, revealing the complete absence of loyalty or genuine love. Their relentless underestimation of Camille, the quiet, compliant wife they treated as an expendable asset, was their fatal flaw. They mistook her silence for stupidity and her patience for weakness. Ultimately, the story proves that authentic success and true freedom are never achieved by tearing others down, but by choosing to build your own life with integrity, independence, and an unwavering belief in your own self-worth. Have you ever watched someone's arrogance become their ultimate undoing? Share your stories of karma in the comments below.